Alrighty, so Jesse Jackson Jr., welcome to the show. Mea Culpa, we've had all sorts of individuals on. We've had, oh my gosh, we've had comedians, we've had actors, we've had politicians, we've had legal scholars, and I am honored, my friend, to call you my friend and to introduce you to Mea Culpa. There's so much to talk about, and we only go for an hour, so we're going to just jump right into it. So
Thank
Jesse,
you for the invitation, Michael.
It's my pleasure. Your father, Reverend Jesse Jackson, has been a monumental figure in the fight for civil rights. How do you see his legacy continuing to shape today's battles for justice, especially under an administration that many are arguing today seeks to undermine those gains?
Michael, my father is a very unique figure in American history in that after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, 1968, he was but a 28-year-old lieutenant who was assigned to a project in the city of Chicago to fight for economic empowerment for minorities, Operation Breadbasket from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In that context, he had confrontations on a regular basis, the African American community, with the Democratic Party of Chicago. When I was growing up, I didn't realize we were Democrats. That's just the nature of the vitriol here in Chicago between the Daley administration, specifically the Richard M. Daley and the Richard J. Daley administration, where he was the boss of the Democratic Party. So we really became independent Democrats in Chicago. The whole city's Democratic, but African Americans are independent Democrats. And that independent movement would lead to, over time, the election of Harold Washington as the first African American mayor. And so there's a unique independence amongst African Americans in Chicago that since Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, my father has been a significant, maybe the most significant figure in nurturing. And that led, of course, to a broader audience after Harold Washington's victory. Reverend Jackson had been working in the southern states because Ronald Reagan and his Justice Department had been undermining the Voting Rights Act. He began a voter registration campaign, a voter registration crusade, if you will, throughout the South. And someone brought up the idea, I think on a radio show, that he should run for president of the United States. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. Let Andy Young do that. Let Maynard Jackson do that. And then it became a kind of run, Jesse, run movement. And the rest is history. 1984 and 1988, coming on the heels of Shirley Chisholm, who ran very briefly for president in 1972. Jesse Jackson ran two very, very important campaigns in 1984 and 88 that changed the shape of the Democratic Party, that ultimately led to Barack Obama's presidency and ultimately led to the nomination of Kamala Harris.
Yeah. I mean, like I've said to you in private, and now I'm going to say it to my Mea Culpa audience. As someone who grew up in the shadow of such a historic figure, my question is, how do you approach mentorship and leadership to inspire the next generation of activists and political leaders?
Well, from that dynamic that you mentioned, Michael, I inherited my father's friends and I inherited his enemies. Now, here's the truth. I've earned neither. I've not earned his friends and I've not earned his enemies. And so when I was elected to Congress in 1995, I did my best to work across the aisle with Newt Gingrich and with Henry Hyde, who I became very, very fond of and ended up traveling the world with Henry and a number of congressional delegations. John Boehner. These are people that I worked with in a very, very different Congress. And I was able to accomplish some fairly extraordinary things. Even Joe Scarborough was in Congress at the time. And that's the context that we used to work. I was able to put Rosa Parks' statue in Statuary Hall, rename or name initially, and ultimately it is its name, Emancipation Hall, in the capital of the United States itself, including the resources that I brought to my congressional district. So what I know about bipartisanship and working with people and working across the lines, I'm not tied to the Democratic Party. I'm not tied to the Republican Party. I work with people who are willing to work for our country and for the betterment of all people. That's the way I've seen myself. That may not be the way I've been perceived, but my record speaks for itself.
Yeah. Which kind of brings up like growing up as Jesse Jackson Jr., there must have been obviously immense pressure to live up to the name that you were given. And when I first, obviously, I had met your father at least a dozen times over the course of the last decade plus. And I have always just admired him for the man that he is. And then I started thinking after you and I became friendly, how did you navigate that? And this is what was really on my mind. How does your experience compare to, for example, Donald Trump Jr., who also at one point was a very good friend of mine, who seems to be carving a path in his father's shadow? And you just said something which I didn't think of when I was sort of thinking of what I was going to ask you. The fact that you inherited your father's friends, but you also inherited his enemies, as Don Jr. is going to also understand and learn. So, what kind of advice would you give him regarding that?
Well, before I get to Don Jr.'s advice, let me share with you my own initial concerns and, if you will, as a young person, my own confusion. I wasn't so sure that I wanted to pursue the path of my father. You mentioned that I had been thrust into it, and that's probably an accurate way of looking at it. I did not fully understand or appreciate the nature of my father's work until I was a young adult. I was always Jesse Jackson Jr. I didn't know another name. I watched him adored by crowds. I watched him standing up for justice and fighting the good fight. We grew up on picket lines. We grew up with very, very humble beginnings. We are not people of resources. We have a famous name, but we have no money. That's just a fact of what it means to be Jesse Jackson Jr. So when I got elected to Congress in 1995, I had to figure out who I was in this unique body as Jesse Jackson Jr. And every time, whether it's entering the third grade, the eighth grade, the 12th grade, or entering Congress, I always go through this phase of people looking at me, trying to figure out if I'm privileged, trying to figure out what is the Jesse Jackson angle, hoping and praying that people give me a chance and not just see my father. And each time, every phase of my life, I have to walk that walk, whether it's walking into a room with a group of people for the first time. They come with prejudgment, which is a form of, and the very definition of prejudice, whether they are black, whether they are white. In some African American audiences, people expect me to get up and give a speech. They expect me to say something. If someone else is having a press conference and I just show up to hear the press conference, people want me to respond. I did not come to respond. I just came to listen. But so there's this thing that is thrust upon you. When I got to Congress and we were in a minority in the Democratic Party, I decided to trace the history of not only my father, but the history of African Americans in Congress, which led to a history of African Americans in the entire country from 1619 through the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, the Constitution on September 17th, 1787, the writing of the Bill of Rights and its addition in 1791, through the process that let one free state and one slave state come into the Union right up until the Civil War, through the Civil War, through First Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, then through Second Reconstruction, the period in which my father emerged and meets Martin Luther King Jr. And then I found myself with the backdrop of that history in 1995 in Congress. And I had to ask myself, what is my contribution going to be to moving the marker, if you will, or carrying the baton just a little bit further down the road? I wanted to position myself, not just in my father's work, which will be Don Jr.'s problem, but you'll have to position yourself in the work and the direction of the country against the objective history of the country, not just the subjective position of being the child of, but the objective of the blessing that you've been given to have a platform to change something, to bring about a betterment, a better quality of life for people. And that's how I mapped out my congressional career and my service. So the pressure created a deeper longing and a desire and an understanding, not just to see the moment, but to see in my finitude, knowing that I will not be here forever, how I would position myself in the present against the backdrop of history and against the future that I'd like to see and leave for my children and for yours.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, which brings me back to the second part of the question, which was, Don Jr., obviously born into immense wealth, generational wealth. The wealth didn't just come from President Trump's successes, but also the grandfather, Fred Trump, who was immensely wealthy. The problem or the difference is while your father was leading a path of unity, of cooperation, of bipartisanship, there's a lot of people, approximately half the country, that believe that President Trump is not a unifier, that he is a divider, that he is not interested in the marginalized, that he's not interested in those who are Black or brown, but that he is only in it for the white Christian nationalist America. And that's a shitty way to start out if you're Don Jr., because if he continues on the path, the political path that his father has put in, very similar to like John F. Kennedy, right? With John F. Kennedy Jr. While their messages are quite different, I just wonder how Don Jr. will carve a path in the shadow, and it is a huge shadow of his father. And what advice would you give him?
Well, first of all, there doesn't seem to be any interest by Don Jr. in carving a objective path beyond the reality that is his father. If he wants to just be Junior, then we already know what we're going to see in his life. If he decides that Don Jr. has a unique contribution that is different than his father, if he can hear the spirit energy of time, of eternity, and recognize that God has given him, just as he's given me, and just as God has given you, the opportunity to carve a unique path in human history with the platform that has been given to him. Will that happen? I don't know. Is it possible? Of course it is. Will it happen? Will it touch his life? I'm not sure. But this I can promise you, into every life, some trouble falls. Into every life comes the experiences of life. Into every life, some rain must fall. And it touches the just and it touches the unjust alike. Both of us have had fairly stellar careers in our objective lives, both you and I. And into our life, some rain must fall. And that rain has fallen. And providentially, because of that rain, it brings us together at this hour. So it's possible to live a life with the wind at your back. But just as sure as I'm sitting here, some planes actually meet headwinds. Some rocket ships actually meet different environments by which they travel. And therefore, those ships are slowed down. And some of that, quite frankly, you have to chuck up to Providence. My advice to Don Jr. would be to move beyond the insular capsule or bubble of that which you believe to be the reality, to know that your father will not be president always. It's the same advice that I gave to Hunter Biden. You don't want to be the only person in America to be pardoned when there's 77 million Americans who've paid their debt to society in full, who are waiting in line for the full, absolute, complete, and unconditional pardon that Michael Cohen deserves, that I believe I deserve, but I don't believe I deserve it any more than the bus driver or the cab driver or the tax offender or the tax evader or the person who got caught up in Medicare or Medicaid issues, who paid their debt to society decades ago and still can no longer practice medicine, can no longer be a nurse, can no longer be an anesthesiologist. And to the extent that we can reach out to these people, restore their lives, and put them back in the economy, the extent to which we see our neighbors as ourselves, I'm confident that we can make a change with the platforms that we have. If I can get to Don Jr., I would tell him that same story.
So it's interesting that you said, because you and I are privately working on something which will be huge, and we're going to talk about that later, in the show. But I'm with you 100%, and I believe the same thing that you do. It's amazing how our roads have ultimately, have diverged. Two very different individuals from two very different backgrounds, to basically be on a similar path. It really is the true definition, as far as I see it, of America. But I have one more question that I want to ask you, because ethical leadership has been a cornerstone of your family's work. And in a political climate that sadly rewards deception and division, how do you think that you and we as a collective community, my Mea Culpa listeners, how do we help to restore a sense of integrity in public service?
Well, first and foremost, 3 books immediately come to mind when you mention this question of ethical leadership. I think about Jesus and the Disinherited by the late Dr. Howard Thurman, who posits in his book that Jesus was born a subject of Rome, a colonial subject of Rome, and that his ministry speaks a very different word to a people whose backs are against the wall. And yes, those people are in Appalachia. They are in red America. I saw them incarcerated. They're on opioids and other forms of narcotics. It was interesting that those who sold crack were in the same prison with those who sold opioids and those doctors who prescribed them, but they were also there with areas of the country that had fentanyl problems. They were all there. We were all there together, even though that was not my particular offense. I think about the message, for example, in my spirit of what that ministry must have been for people whose back is against the wall. I think about Robert Franklin's book, Moral Leadership, where he talks about moral leadership as having an ethical foundation, and that ethical foundation is really the plumb line, if you will, or the gravitating force in our lives to stand up for something other than ourselves, and ultimately to love one's neighbor as oneself is at the center of that ethos. It is really the sum of religion, to love one God and one's neighbor as oneself. And so I sit here as a Christian, you sit there as a Jew. We recognize Muslims, we recognize the agnostic, we recognize the atheist. I'm not asking you to be a Christian. You're not asking me to be a Jew. We're not asking anyone to change their beliefs. What we're asking ourselves, ultimately, what we're asking everyone to do is understand that we have a civil code and that we have a civil religion that allows us to be civil in this country. And it's unlike any other country in human history. It is the greatest country ever conceived. And yet, with its shortcomings, there is some tweaking around the edges that we must do in our lives to make it better for everyone else.
Yeah, amen to that. Now, both you and I want to touch upon what you just brought up, because I think it's just so incredibly important. You and I have both been vocal advocates for changing laws that affect both nonviolent felons, or mostly nonviolent felons, after they have completed their sentence. What specific reforms would you prioritize, and why do you think, as I do, that these changes are absolutely crucial for true redemption and reintegration into society?
I wrote a book called The Finger of God. I found something in the Constitution of the United States that the founding fathers themselves placed in the Constitution, and they called it the finger of God in the September 17th, 1787 Republic. I cleaned off, excavated, and found a religion in the Constitution. And that religion isn't Judaism, it isn't Christianity, it isn't Islam. It's called the sect of one. Thomas Jefferson said, "I'm in a sect of one," meaning that the highest form of religion is Michael Cohen in solitary confinement by himself. Jesse Jackson Jr. in solitary confinement by himself. Martin Luther King Jr. in a Birmingham jail by himself. Nelson Mandela in prison by himself. Mohandas Gandhi in jail by himself. In other words, the highest form of religion is my personal relationship, your personal relationship with a divine being, with the divine being, with the spirit energy. They called it the sect of one. So what they did was they extracted from the linear theological system Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, David, and Jesus. David and Jesus. They extracted the commander of the army, David, and the repriever pardoner, Jesus, and they put it in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 as a function, meaning one person in our society has the power to function in the lineage of David for all of the American people. This is years before the Bill of Rights, and they called it the finger of God, which means the President of the United States doesn't just have an obligation to help his son or his family as he leaves office. It means the President of the United States is in a unique religion by themselves, not just to forgive Democrats, not just to forgive Republicans. The Democratic Party didn't come into existence until 1793 and the Republican Party 1854. I'm talking 1787 when there were no political parties, a theological experiment. So really the question before us, at least from my perspective, Michael, is how do we purify the fountainhead of mercy in our nation? Why does it have to be a black president has to win who only pardons black people? Why does it have to be a Democratic president who wins, who looks and judges our lives one more time beyond what the judge said do or the jury said do? He's going to relitigate everyone's pardon application. Oh, I don't want to pardon him. I don't want to pardon her. It messes with my legacy. That's not the religion. What you're called on in that position is the restoration of human life, regardless of the religion of the individuals in the system. You're the only person with the absolute immunity to forgive people and grant them a new life, as you did Hunter, as you did your own family members as you walked out the door, or even whether you agree with it or disagree with it. It is Donald Trump's absolute right to pardon January 6th rioters. And I sincerely and strongly disagree with pardoning people who have not paid their debt to society in full. But what I do believe, like you and I, that there are 77 million people just like you and I who've done what the judge said do. We did what the jury said do. We did our time. We're walking around this country with a felony still on our records. We're checking the box. We can't raise our heads. We have credit problems. Literally, I received a bank note today that my home in Washington, D.C. is in foreclosure. I can't afford it any longer. Tried to sell it, complications of the marriage, etc. Lost the marriage in that process. So what I'm saying to you is the remedy is not a political remedy. The remedy is a spiritual remedy that the architects themselves saw and put in the Constitution because they recognized the sect of one as the foundation of the faith. We've not, Michael, been able to find someone to run for president and be in that position since Abraham Lincoln. Now, the first 6 presidents understood it, but then it seems to have been lost. I want to reestablish it.
Well, I think there's a real possibility. I hate to say it. Actually, I'm excited to say it. I'm kind of mixed emotion to say it. It could actually be somebody like Donald J. Trump, a guy who legitimately doesn't give a shit what anybody thinks. He, unlike President Biden, and shame on him for walking out. And I mean that sincerely. Shame on him for walking out, pardoning people who get no benefit out of that pardon, considering that they have never even been charged. So these preemptive pardons, great. You're concerned about your family. I respect that. But I'm also disappointed because he left a lot of people high and dry. People who, like myself, like a Cassidy Hutchinson, like an Alyssa Farah Griffin, like a Stormy Daniels, like a Stephanie Grisham, and whether you like these folks or you don't, irrelevant. These are people that are in harm's way for doing the right thing. The holiday season messing with your routine? Looking to take charge of your life with full mental clarity this new year? You want to enhance your sober January and embrace CBD Awareness Month with VIA to experience the powerful benefits of hemp without the high. It's trusted by over 500,000 customers. VIA, it's the Swiss Army knife of wellness, dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. Look, VIA's collection of THC-free products, it combines minor cannabinoids like CBD, CBG, and CBN with botanical supplements for targeted effects that you can actually feel. So whether you're looking to improve your sleep, your focus, or relief, VIA has something for you. Now look, I've tried the THC-free gummies for sleep. And let me tell you, anyone who knows me knows that I've had sleep issues my entire life. Where the hell has this product been my entire life, right? VIA is also well renowned for their award-winning THC, their THC-free gummies, vapes, THCA, flower, soothing topicals, and calming drops. All of them crafted with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. And the best part, VIA legally ships to nearly all states in the United States in discreet packaging, directly to your door, with a worry-free guarantee, and no medical card is required. Look, let me share some points about VIA. First of all, industry leader, number 1. 2, made in the US of A. 3, award-winning service. 4, quality ingredients. And 5, it's affordable and accessible. So if you're 21 plus, check out the link to VIA in our description and use code Cohen to receive 15% off. And if you're new to VIA, you'll get a free gift of your choice. So after you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. So please help to support our show and tell them that we sent you. This year, enhance your everyday with VIA. These are people who were, like myself, subpoenaed to testify. And instead of taking the knee, instead of bowing to one man instead of the system, that system places you in harm's way. And as a result of placing you in harm's way, you would expect, not even hope, expect that the leader of the country, who, as you absolutely perfectly placed it, has the total authority, unchecked authority to do God's work. And he didn't. He left after taking care of his family and saying, my family's more important. And I thought that that's terrible.
Oh, it's more than terrible, and it's probably going to be the greatest blemish upon his record that he left so many millions of people in felonization and in harm's way. And the idea, of course, you understand, the preemptive pardon is a relatively new concept when one thinks about the finger of God, because usually you have probable cause established. Usually you have to go before a grand jury. Usually you're indicted and you go through a process that may or may not include incarceration. But at the end of that process, if found guilty, even if you pled guilty, in my case, and I think in others, and you do your time, you subsequently should be able to walk out of that system with the full restoration of one's rights in the life, liberty, and happiness system. And that's a theological enterprise for the founding fathers of our nation. What happened to you and to the names that you mentioned is shameful, that the president of the United States, the former president, only saw himself. And interestingly enough, I think history, as crazy as this moment is, in light of what you just said, provides Donald Trump with an unprecedented opportunity. He may end up pardoning more people than any president in American history, starting with the 1,500 people that he pardoned just a few days ago. I talked with a doctor after we did our show together a few days ago. This doctor, his name is Michael Jones. Michael Jones was a cardiologist out of New Orleans, And he grew his practice very, very quickly. And he said to himself, Self, I get so much money from Medicare and Medicaid, I am sure that I'm going to be a target, given that I am the leading cardiologist in New Orleans. And it sure came. He said, over the course of my career, Jesse, I put 200 people in home care. 3 of them, maybe 3 of them, there was an overbilling issue. The government went through all of my Medicare cases and found these 3 people. And we said, okay, we'll reimburse that. I don't handle the accounting. I don't do any of that. But it did not stop him from catching a case. But what he brought to my attention was, he says, I'm 58 years old. I can no longer, as one of the nation's leading cardiologists, one of 500 Black cardiologists in the whole country, he said, I can no longer practice medicine in a hospital or in a clinic or anywhere where there's Medicaid or Medicare or government reimbursements. I am a scientist. There is nothing about my life from the moment I went to high school, college, graduate school, and my specialty that I ever said, I'm a crook. I'm going to be a crook one day. No, I'm a surgeon. I'm a heart surgeon. Then he mentioned to me, Michael, that there are 70,000 other medical professionals in our country who are doctors, anesthesiologists, nurses, all of them, none of them have done malpractice. They've never hurt anyone. Their crimes are paper crimes from Medicare and Medicaid. And they cannot practice medicine again.
Yeah,
These are scientists.
I was with a bunch of them in Otisville too.
That's interesting.
We had 4 or 5 doctors there.
After they pay their debt to society and they are pardoned, many of the disparities that exist in our community in terms of health can easily be remedied by this large body of scientists who need to be forgiven and brought back into the system. Believe me, they went to prison, they did their time, but now they're felons and they can't even practice. Some of them are working at Starbucks because they need healthcare.
Yep. Think about how crazy that is conceptually. Somebody goes to school, they go to medical school, then they go to for specialty. You're talking about finishing your residency, your fellowship. You're probably around 31, 32 years of age. Think about that. And somebody as talented as Dr. Jones in your case, and I was with a few of them when I was in Otisville. We had everybody at Otisville. We had reality stars that were with us. I had Mike Sorrentino, The Situation, was with me at Otisville from Jersey Shore. Billy McFarland from Fire Festival was with me. We had Senator Dean Skelos here of New York, Republican. We had a litany of characters when I was there. But I always thought to myself, Medicare, Medicaid, money issue. Imagine taking away somebody as talented a surgeon as Dr. Jones or some of the folks that I was with, orthopedic surgeon. And instead of incarcerating them, put them into a remote area where medical attention is lacking and let them work so that they can pay back the restitution, as opposed to stripping them of a ability that benefits all mankind. I just find human warehousing. Now, I'm not talking about violent crimes. I'm talking about somebody makes a mistake on a tax return.
That's right.
Or they, for whatever the reason is, they don't pay tax for whatever their own personal reason is. I get it. Make them pay it back. The way you get somebody not to pay it back is take away their ability to earn a living. It's just, to me, ass backwards. And, I watched, even as today, President Trump went ahead and he pardoned a guy by the name of Ross Ulbricht. And you may remember that name. He was the founder of what's called Silk Road, and that was the dark web. And on the dark web, he was selling drugs onto it, mushrooms, and not big scale, drug dealer like what you're seeing out of, the cartels in Mexico. He was selling, homegrown mushrooms and things like that. But this concept of the dark web, it grew. It grew into pornography. It grew into the sale of guns and missiles and rockets and tanks and anything that you want to buy that you should not be permitted to buy, you could buy on the dark web. And this guy got life imprisonment with no chance of parole. Several young children who had gone onto his Silk Road website had ultimately died of overdoses from not his drugs, but that fentanyl was being moved on there at record numbers. And he got, as a result, life imprisonment with no chance of parole. Well, today he's a free man. Donald Trump pardoned him. I'm curious what you think about these folks that have those type of sentences that are just idiotic, to be honest with you. You know, we're on this planet for as long as God sees fit. And then to take a young man, because he was in his 20s at the time, and to put him away for life when clearly he's got a talent, maybe make him do something that benefits society instead of locking him up and throwing away the key because he built a website that other people were using. He was like the Amazon of things you should not be allowed to buy. But is that really a good enough reason to lock him up and throw away the key?
So
And
one of the things,
I think the answer is no.
so my thing has been in this environment politically, what I know is, and I believe is accomplishable, and where the greatest opportunity for having moral authority when you make the argument, or when I make the arguments publicly, is the debt paid felon. That category right there, when those people who did what the judge said do and did what the jury said do are freed, and then they have to, at the Department of Justice, fill out an application, wait 5 more years to fill out the application, no guarantee that you're going to get accepted if you fill out the application. The average cost of a pardon lawyer in Washington, D.C. is somewhere between $250,000 to $500,000 with no guarantee that you're going to get the pardon in the first place. So the debt paid felon, the moms, the pops, the daughters, the sons, the average man and woman who gets caught up in the system ought be pardoned to stay out of felonization at the completion of their sentence. Now, this case right here, life in prison without the possibility of parole, really does belong in the sect of one. In other words, the President of the United States has to weigh the jury's verdict and or the judge's sentence against how that individual may or may not be of benefit to society if he's changing a life sentence or commuting someone's sentence from death row to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and make a judgment about what greater contribution they could make if they were out of prison. I think that the trier of fact and the mercy clause in the Constitution, the pardon power, has to be weighed on an individual basis. And I don't have enough information about the person who created the dark web. But what I can speak to without any hesitation is, once Michael Cohen has done what the jury and the judge who sentenced him said do, that when he returns to society, he must be granted the full, complete, absolute, and unconditional pardon that Donald Trump gave to Paul Manafort and Roger Stone, that Gerald Ford gave to Richard Nixon, and that Joe Biden gave to his son. And you said it really clearly. The language of the pardon matters. And you said it even clearer on my show. You better believe this language, you said, was reviewed, re-reviewed, handed over to some ex-federal judges and reviewed, and sent to some prosecutors and reviewed, and they arrived at what? The Hunter Biden language. And so that we don't have to pay that that massive fortune that it took to get that language, we want the exact same language. Take off Hunter's name, put our name there, put the bus drivers there, put the cab drivers there, put the medical professionals there, and grant us the same pardon, because our lives are no less of worth and value than Hunter Biden's.
Yeah, totally agree. And the one thing, Joe Biden also pardoned a lot of low-level, say, for example, marijuana, convictions. And I really thought that there was a chance that he was going to do what we keep talking about, protecting the 77 million children, Biden children, because that's what we all are, to the president. Whether you like the guy or you don't, we are
He is the
all his
father of the country.
children.
He's the father
My
of the country.
feeling, exactly, my feeling was that Joe Biden was going to be the guy to do this, and obviously disappointed in that he elected not to. But I give him at least the kudos for starting it with these marijuana convictions. I was with a guy who got 10 years, a black guy who got 10 years for distribution at the time of about 30,000 pounds of marijuana. And someone said, holy shit, 30,000 pounds. I mean, that's a lot. Sure. But compared to these multinational cannabis companies today, they're moving 30,000 pounds an hour. And so the laws changed. The societal view of marijuana has now changed. Shit, you can't walk on the streets in Manhattan without smelling somebody smoking a blunt at the corner. I mean, it's insane. Your hair starts smelling. All of a sudden, you're looking at the guy in front of you. He's just smoking away, blowing the smoke like he don't give a shit. Why? Because it's legal. And then to have people now with felony convictions, I gave Joe Biden the credit for it, but I expected him to take it further. But he didn't. And while I, of course, have to hold the leader accountable, I believe it's the losers that he had around him. And I call them what they are. They are losers because they were thinking about, well, how will this affect his legacy? If in fact that he does what you and I are talking about, having compassion, having that love for 77 million of your children who have finished their sentences completely and should no longer have that scarlet letter attached to their jersey of an F for felon.
Let me
And
remind
he
you.
didn't do
Let,
it.
let me remind you. Let me remind your listeners that this question of forgiveness, and I know we just use this term forgiveness, a language, by the way, in English that Jesus himself did not speak. So we still don't understand what forgiveness is in the Christological context of when Jesus, who spoke Aramaic, actually used it. But this thing is so powerful. Forgiveness is so powerful that when the Catholic Church reached its zenith in the Middle Ages, and the idea of forgiveness had become so corrupt, Martin Luther tapped 95 theses on the church at Wittenberg, and it divided Christianity between Catholicism and Protestantism. Donald Trump loves to put his names on things. He wants statues built after him. He likes gold toilets. He likes the ambiance and the opulence of gold. He wants to be remembered. He wants to be adored. But if you think about it, one of the things that irritated Democrats the most in this campaign was trying to talk to young African American men who said, Donald Trump sent me a check. I got his signature right here on a check. He never should have been allowed to do that, but he did. But they remembered it. And they got no check from Joe Biden. No check. If Donald Trump wants to be remembered, he will understand that number of 77 million. And maybe God gave him 34 felonies on his way into the White House so he could think about it and reflect upon what it's like to have them attached to your name. In just about every African American household somewhere in the country, there's a picture of Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, and Bobby Kennedy sitting on someone's mantle. If Donald Trump ever understands the forgiveness power in the Constitution, the function of the lineage of David, there could very well be a pardon in millions of households with his signature affixed to it. And I'm telling you, as sure as I'm sitting here, it's going to divide the Democratic Party. It's going to divide the Democratic Party. I'm sorry?
No, I think it destroys the Democratic Party.
Oh, that's what I mean.
A move like that would ultimately destroy the Democratic Party. Because, again, something you've probably heard me say, I said it on your show. The Democratic Party which I am, as you are, a member of, we're playing by an old playbook. And
That's
I
right.
tried to use, because obviously football and American football, you ever see the notebook of the offensive line coach, the defensive line coach, and then the overall coach, where they have 5 different people up in the booth and they're all speaking, via walkie-talkie to one another regarding the running of plays, the defensive plays, and so on? That is a very serious playbook. It's why they guard it with their lives. I use that as the example of politics. Donald Trump took and recreated a playbook. He took the old Republican playbook, he burnt it to ashes, and then, like a phoenix, he restored it in a way that is Trumpian. That is all about him. It's id, it's ego, it's super ego, it's bluster, much of it bullshit, but doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference. People bought into it. And while we had Kamala Harris playing as well by the old playbook, what ended up happening? Donald Trump took that playbook and, with 3 little words, wrecked it. Wrecked the entire conversation about policy, about the border, about immigration, about tariffs, about you name it, infrastructure, CHIPS Act, whatever. All the things that Joe Biden did that benefited America, Donald Trump beat the living piss out of it with 3 words: gasoline and groceries. My point is, what do you think that Democrats need to do better to engage voters, especially in marginalized communities, moving forward? Because I've heard the same thing that you've said about those COVID checks, the COVID relief checks. Steve Mnuchin, initially, as Secretary of the Treasury, signed them. Donald, say whatever you want about him, saw through it and said, I want every single person to see that check coming from me. I heard him say it myself. And you know what? It helped propel him back to the office of presidency.
I think, I didn't want to misspeak. I wanted to use the analogy of the church in Wittenberg and Martin Luther to say that the Democratic Party could be divided. But you're right. The idea that someone is going to forgive you for everything you've done in your past and grant you a new life in this system is such a profound gift in every household in America that it would destroy the Democratic Party. There's no doubt about it. It would destroy it. And as Democrats self-righteously say, well, why would you forgive this person? And why would you? These are the same people that you ask to vote for you in every election, every 2 years,
Right.
and every 4 years. But the same people whom you give a vote to or seek a vote from, you don't think that the ink in a pen, which could change their existence and take them off of the books at the Department of Justice, is worthy of their life. I keep telling people when I did my show with you, I said, I've got a lot in common with Michael Cohen. He knows my dad. They've met each other on many occasions. He's worked with other friends of mine. He's a great friend of Reverend Al Sharpton, who adores Michael Cohen. And they said, well, why would you have Michael Cohen on your show? I said, because we meet at a special time and a special place with a common fate. I could have never seen or understood your strength against Donald Trump when you were his lawyer and doing work for him in the context of that organization. But then I saw you when you came out of prison, and I saw you when you said on your way into prison that my children are looking at me a certain kind of way. And Reverend Sharpton called me after your breakfast with him, and he said, man, this is a changed man right here that I just had breakfast with, Jesse. Michael is a new person, and I think you subsequently did his show. And then years had passed until about 2 months ago. I said, Reverend, can I have Michael Cohen's phone number? I'd like to reach out to him. And then you called me back within an hour, and we began a discussion about the things that we have in common and the bridges that we think we can build. And I was ecstatic.
I found a tool that gives me insights to create a healthy metabolism for my body. And it's managed to improve other aspects of my life as well. And it's called Lumen. So what's Lumen? Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs. And it'll give you a tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, your sleep, and even stress management. So look, here's how Lumen works. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. And you can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals so that you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. Look, I'm not a kid anymore, and my metabolism, well, it's just not as fast as it used to be. So staying healthy and fit, it's much harder. And anything I can do to gain an advantage, well, look, I'm interested. And here's why. First, your metabolism. It's your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food that you eat into fuel that keeps you going for the day. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything that your body does, optimal metabolic health, it translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, and more. And Lumen, it gives you recommendations to improve your metabolic health. And to the women out there, it'll also help you track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so that you too can keep your energy and stave off cravings. So look, take the next step right now to improving your health and go to lumen.me/Cohen to get 20% off your Lumen. That's LUMEN.me/Cohen for 20% off your purchase. And thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Because the circumstances of life creates our dynamic. There's nothing about either of the roads that we've been on that would have brought us to this point. But I'm grateful to God to have had this opportunity.
Yeah, as am I. Now, just to give some clarity to that, Rev and I have been friends since 1999, just to give you an idea. And he has seen, he's seen me both personally and professionally. And yeah, he said the same thing to me when we were sitting at the Regency having a breakfast. His basically consists of a glass of tea. Mine was a nice bacon cheese omelet, but who's going to talk about that? Not really sure about the relevance, but he turned around and he goes, I see a different you. And I said, no, I've always been this way. He goes, I think it's more the perception people see of you in terms of, what and how I conducted myself professionally as the sharp-elbowed lawyer for a guy who demanded that. Who not only demanded it, but he needed it. And he didn't just need it from a lawyer. He needed it from a friend. Somebody who was willing to get into the dirt and to fight somebody and not just hit him, but to beat the piss out of him. Because that's what Donald Trump needed. And that's what I ultimately delivered on to my demise. But I want to ask you, since obviously you and I now are both in media, to say the least, how do you think that media plays a significant role in shaping public's perception? And it's going to be, as we go forward over the course of the next 4 years, media and shaping Trump's comments and the things he says and the things he does, including what we're going to see very, very soon, and that's massive roundups, mass deportation now, which will all be videotaped. It will all be put out on the internet whether it's going to be on Trump's Truth Social, on Elon Musk's X, on Zuckerberg's Meta, or Bezos's Washington Post and online digital. You believe that Black leaders like yourself are portrayed, first of all, fairly in the media? And do you think that allowing the media to shape the public perception, especially towards minority communities, is
I think
beneficial?
I've never seen myself as a Black leader. Let me start with that. I was the congressman of the 2nd Congressional District of Illinois, and I understood growing up in my household that my father was perceived as an African American leader, but we're leading the American people. It takes 270 electoral votes to get anything done in this country. I mean, you just can't be the leader of Black people and garner 270 electoral votes and the popular vote. To run this country, you must speak to all Americans at all times, even if the vantage point is from a person whose back is against the wall. And so it's difficult, but I can share with you this. There's still infinite possibility in the model, although I am concerned now more about the media than I have ever been. When ABC Disney paid the settlement to President Trump, and then we saw the Washington Post decline in endorsement and the Los Angeles Times decline in endorsement. When we saw Elon Musk acquire Twitter and turn it to X, and we see the control of what to do with TikTok for a new generation of young people, this idea of controlling the narrative matters to the oligarchs. It does matter. And so these independent voices, Michael Cohen, the independent voices, Jesse Jackson Jr., the independent voices, Tavis Smiley, and some of the independent voices at WVON, and our cross-fertilization of sharing platforms allows us to attract people to truth tellers. And when you hear the truth, you can measure it against the untruth, or a media that is no longer objective in their journalism. I am not a journalist. I am not a media professional, but I am, and I do believe in advocacy journalism. I do believe in using a platform to make the case for people who cannot speak for themselves. I mean, I'm 59 years old. So this is what I have left. I've lost everything. And so the extent to which we can build a coalition around the truth, around honesty, and around integrity, Michael Cohen, you are on a rocket ship that ain't coming back no time soon, brother.
I needed to slow down a little bit, but I hate to, I don't want to disagree with you, Jesse, but I see you as a Black leader, and I think more people see you as a Black leader than you even know. Your radio program, where was that? That was in L.A., KBLA.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
KBLA in L.A., which you can get anywhere that you want to listen. I think you are a leader. And I think that all communities, Black, white, brown, see you in the same way. And it's funny because on your show, we talked about you turning and saying that people see me as a hero. I don't see myself as a hero, not in the slightest. In fact, I don't even like the term, right? Because I don't see anything that I did as heroic. I didn't step up and say to Robert Mueller, ooh, like Arnold Horseshack, remember from Welcome Back, Kotter, right? I didn't say that, ooh, pick me, Mr. Kotter, right? No. I never said that. I got subpoenaed. And I did what I was legally obligated to do. In fact, I had begged Trump. It was either February, March of 2017, it was in 2018. I had begged him not to let this shit continue when I was first subpoenaed by SIPSI, the Senate Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. I didn't want to do it. He was like, actually, it was 2017. And he turned around and he goes, Michael, this is a big story. It's huge. It's getting out of control. It's terrible. It's making me look bad. He allowed his impression of how he thought people, and it could be one or two people, it may not even have been 20 people, it could have been two people, cloud his judgment. When I begged him, I don't want to testify, just shut the shit down, just close it down, nothing good could come out of it, just do it. And that was the beginning of the end, not just of our relationship, but of his ability, right, to sort of escape
So let me
accountability.
let me just make this small point. When I had you on my show on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, you began with a reflection about Martin Luther King Jr. for our predominantly African American audience. And many of the comments after the show was, I didn't know Michael Cohen had that kind of respect for Dr. King. Really, your introduction to that audience moved you from being the Michael Cohen that they saw on the news, the one fighting Donald Trump, the one speaking truth to power and standing up. And not one of them said Michael Cohen is a white leader. They said, this is a decent guy, man. He feels the same way about these issues that we feel about it. So when I resist the idea that I'm a black leader, I'm not denying that I'm African American. I'm speaking to the values of who we are as a people and who we are as human beings. That doesn't just limit me to the black side of town.
No.
I mean, I want to debate the economy with you. I want to debate tax cuts. I have been all over the world. I have met 2 popes. I have met 6 presidents of the United States and served under 4 of them. I was the national co-chairman of U.S. candidate for Senate Barack Obama with the late Paul Simon in Chicago. I was co-chairman of Obama and Biden's campaign in 2008. And Obama said no to my pardon when I got out of prison. And Joe Biden said no to my pardon when I got out of prison. But Donald Trump did not say no to the pardon of his campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. And I'm still
And
trying to
Roger
figure out
Stone.
what I did to those guys.
Right. Now you got them
So,
elected. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
Eric, I helped
hey,
get him elected. I mean, I covered more states than
exactly.
only
Well,
other than him and Michelle.
what's good for me is not always what's good for you. I guess that's their motto. So let me say this, because the hour, as I said at the beginning, goes by very quickly. I just want to ask you a kind of like a one last personal question. In the face of these significant political and social challenges, actually, let me ask you a better question than that. Since you brought up your time in Congress, you championed numerous initiatives that aimed to improve the lives of your constituents, black and white. What do you consider your proudest accomplishments, and how do you see their impact today?
Her name is Jessica Jackson. She attended the University of California, Los Angeles, while her father was incarcerated. And when she could, she came to visit me in prison in both Butner, North Carolina, and in FPC Montgomery. My son is a student at Morehouse College in his junior year, finishing his junior year, and I see them as my greatest accomplishments. Not just the money I brought to my district or the programs that I funded around the globe for global health, to which I've been awarded more than 13 honorary doctorates. Those are far more earthly than the Michael Cohen that I heard when he said, I'm concerned mostly about how my children see me. I remember when my children were invited and the belle of the ball at every party, Michael, because I was somebody. Their father was Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. And then the fall came. The valley of my life came. And they stopped getting invitations. They stopped being invited places. They felt some shame, some blame, and some guilt just being my children. And these 2 people who are the loves of my life, getting them reacquainted to their father who still fights, who still believes, who wants to achieve some level of redemption in our system, matters to me because it matters to little bitty clouds of inferiority that developed in their minds through this process. That is my greatest accomplishment and my greatest goal, because it's my source of motivation to fight for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't come home and look in their eyes and feel good about myself and about how they see me, then I will have accomplished nothing. And so that is a propelling factor as much as anything. They are my greatest accomplishments, and they are the future. They are the gift that I leave to the world when I'm no longer here.
Jesse, thank you, my friend. Look forward to speaking with you in the Chicago program, as well as some other things that, like I said to my audience, that we are working on in order to change the lives of 77 million people similarly situated to both Jesse and I. And so, Jesse, thank you, my friend. And as you know, I'm sure we'll be calling each other in the next day or so.
I can't wait, Michael. And thank you so much for having me. And I really can't wait to meet your kids. They've got
You
to
got
be
the same,
incredibly
and vice
proud of your
versa.
family.
I'm coming to Morehouse. We're going to go speak there too.
Let's do it.
Thank you, pal.